Hello, welcome back to a video from the Pacificus Mapping channel. Today I just want to talk about another part of early phase of World War II that is um, more marginal and lesser discussed, and that is the German invasions of Denmark and Norway during April, May, and June 1940. So, today I want to talk about the Scandinavian operations, Operation Weserübung, during the spring of 1940. So, as you may know, Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, and the United Kingdom and France had declared war on Germany on September 3rd. And over the course of the next several months, both sides have been developing plans. Both the Axis, both Germany and Britain, France, have been developing plans on how to defeat one another. And German plan involved something slower at the start, but eventually a rapid maneuver into northern France to eliminate the bulk of the forces and then capture the rest of France, intended as a sort of a two-step invasion. The Allies, on the other hand, did not want to invade Germany through some um, grand offensive. They were playing defensively, and they had never wanted to increase the scale of the war. They wanted to lose as few lives as possible, and so they did not retaliate against the German bombings of Poland with bombings on German cities. Instead, they dropped leaflets and expressed serious words of condemnation in diplomatic letters that you'd see in the Yellow Book and the British Blue Book, but no signs of full-scale war. The French did launch a little offensive into Saarland called the Saar Offensive. They had about triple the amount of forces as the Germans on the other side, and yet they did not advance any further than about a dozen miles, and it became a practically meaningless, fruitless show of assistance to Poland without actually accomplishing anything. They never really wanted to advance. They pulled back in only several weeks after, anyway. So both the British and French were uninterested in a long World War I style trench warfare in the Western Front. They they created plans for other ways to wage war against Germany, including economic warfare. The British tried to blockade the Germans navally, but the German U-boat submarines managed to take a incredible toll on British shipping, including shipping from the United States to Britain, and then the German fleet in the North and South Atlantic, um, most notably and infamously Hans Langdorff's Admiral Graf Spee, were moving about in the South Atlantic and briefly in the southern Indian Ocean to disrupt British shipping before being um, eliminated near Uruguay. And the British and French also want to, they conceived of ideas to wage war in other parts of Europe um, besides just economic warfare. They consider serious military involvement, but not on the Western Front. They met in a supreme Allied command meeting in Hove, France, and the British and French military leaders agreed to not escalate the conflict in the Western Front. They discussed plans to intervene either in Salonika or Istanbul to try to dissuade um, uh, German encroachments into the Balkans, but they worried about Mussolini's intents and whether an Allied um, landing in Istanbul or Saloniki would um, encourage the Italians to side with the Germans, which they wanted to avoid. Secondly, they considered Operation Pike, which was a planned operation against the Soviet Union, who's supporting the Germans with oil supply. And this Operation Pike involved an Allied bombing operation in Baku in the Azerbaijani SSR. Now, this would have been essentially a declaration of war against yet another power, against the Soviet Union. Keep in mind, the British and French were not at war with the Soviet Union, they were at war with Germany. And yet, many politicians in both of those countries' assemblies considered um, attacking the Soviet Union because they viewed them as aggressors, because they had also invaded Poland. Eventually, both of those ideas were scratched. Instead, they opted for a much less disruptive idea, which was to send in uh, mines across the Rhine River, let it flow um, to disrupt German transportation near the Ruhr. So instead of active aerial bombardment, they opted for a plan to send in these mines across the river to the Germans. And even this was rejected because the French government was fearful. Edward Daladier suggested that this might prompt the Germans to do something similar along the Meuse and send their own mine weapons across the Meuse River, which would escalate the war on the Western Front, which is contrary to the interests of both France and the UK. So neither of them opted for any sort of aggression. Nothing in the Southern Balkans, nothing against Azerbaijan, and nothing along the Rhine River. However, they did think of another plan: Norway. You see, Norway has long coastline, uh, and the Germans know this just as well as the British do, that the British dominate the North Sea. And while the Germans do have a presence, naval presence in the North Sea and the Skagerrak, they have a clear inferiority. Germans rely on iron imported from northern Sweden near Kiruna. Now, that iron ore is not transported through a train track line down to southern Sweden and then shipped across the Baltic Sea to Germany. Instead, it is shipped to Narvik, a port in Norway, and then transported to Germany. So, for that logistical reason, Norway is what permits Swedish iron ore to enter the German military economy to further build its planes and tanks and other belligerent machinery. So Norway was a problem, and yet Germany couldn't simply secure it. And as long as Sweden was sending in its iron ore, and there was no one stopping the iron ore leaving the port of Narvik in Norway, then Germany can trade with Sweden all it wants and receive the iron ore imports. And it was on good terms with both Sweden and Norway, and no one would prevent it. The British wanted to blockade that. The British wanted to prevent the Germans from receiving its iron ore. And a plan to do that? Well, direct intervention into Norway. into the northern port of Narvik to secure that and to secure the iron ore mines in northern Sweden. So, intervention into Norway that would violate Norway's neutrality and diplomatic rights in order to prevent Swedish imports from entering Germany. They tried diplomatic methods, and those diplomatic methods failed. They were unable to convince either Norway or Sweden to end their imports to Germany. Keep in mind, both of those Scandinavian countries have very small militaries in land and in water. They're big trade countries. And so the British developed a plan for intervention, and it did not go off yet. There was no diplomatic reason that would encourage, that would get the British general public to support such a plan. Until the end of November 1939, something switched. The Soviet Union invaded Finland, and the whole world was against the Soviets. They were rooting on the Finns, and the British general public was fully in support and wanted to send as much aid as possible. Many volunteers, the largest number of which came from Sweden, largest number of which came from Denmark, assisted the Finns in its defense against the Soviet Union, which remained successful for many months. Now, in order to support Finland, as they would claim, the British government, the British Admiralty, suggested landing troops in northern Norway to march them across the north into northern Sweden and northern Finland the long way, instead of simply landing them up in a northern port like Petsamo, that they would land in Narvik and then march their way through 3 countries in order to reach the front lines and assist against the Russians. Either the front lines or somewhere in the back. But either way, it would involve going through both Norway and Sweden. Now, this gave a more legitimate political excuse to intervene in Norway directly. And keep in mind that neither governments of Sweden nor Norway appreciated this, and both asked the British government to stay out. And yet the British were intent on this intervention. Now, eventually the Germans came to know of this, and they knew of how vital Swedish iron ore imports were to its war economy. And so they tried to prevent what the British were planning to do. They knew about this. And so they created another plan to intervene in Norway before the British could. Now, the British needed to gain 2 things in order to intervene. One was the support of the general public. Without that support, then Prime Minister Chamberlain would be ousted, as this would be seen as unnecessary and unsupported by the public, and all of the MPs would lose support for him, and after a vote of no confidence, he would end his leadership. And secondly, they needed logistical capability. They needed to be able to transport so many British troops to Narvik, and the equipment and capability to transport them across the frozen landscape of northern Norway, hundreds of miles of northern Sweden, and then a couple hundred miles of northern Finland until they reach somewhere like Suomussalmi or Petsamo in northern Finland. And that required some work. And so they developed that over time. They developed Arctic capabilities. They developed some ski units. They tried to invest in understanding the geography of the area, although their understanding of it was very poor. In fact, one report suggests that um, a a British in the British High Command, they're using an old map from the 1910s, uh, during which no, the early 1900s, that decade in which Norway and Sweden was one country, and so they couldn't tell whether the lines in between them were national borders or telephone lines, and they were confused by using wrong maps. And that example is just to show how misinformed the British Admiralty was while making that decision. Now, uh, Winston Churchill was very supportive of such intervention, but some members of Chamberlain's cabinet was not so much in support. For instance, Lord Halifax um, expressed some of his personal qualms with such endeavors, as it would harm Great Britain's reputation as a protector of peace and protector of national rights, as they would be infringing upon the rights of Norwegian and Swedish neutrality. And even with this moral cause of supporting Finland against the Soviet Union, the international community, including the United States, importantly, may not support its geopolitically rooted endeavors, not a moral one, um, in uh, in violating the rights of both the Norwegian and Swedish governments. The French were in support of this. Edward Daladier informed Chamberlain that his country would send in troops into Norway for the same reason that the British were interested. And so it would be a joint endeavor, although more British than French, if this were to occur. Yet they lacked, eventually they developed military capability and logistical capability, but they lacked popular support for it. And yet, as crisis mounted and war in the Western Front seemed more imminent and more likely, the British Parliament decided to enact this Narvik Plan and decided to launch an intervention into Norway, first by mining Norwegian waters, violating its maritime neutrality and rights by by use of British naval forces to mine the waters, to put naval mines underneath the seas around Norway's key ports to deter German intervention. But during this time, the Germans had also uh, made strides in their efforts um, to to launch their own attack against Norway. They wanted to prevent the British from intervening into Norway, cutting off their iron ore supply, and so the Germans developed Operation Weserübung, meaning exercise on the Weser River, which is a misnomer because that's not what the plan is about at all. It's about Scandinavia. The Germans planned a strong coordination with naval and land forces. The naval forces to attack the British naval forces, including any aircraft carrier, destroyer, submarine in the area, using British heavy cruisers and cruisers, and a series of submarine forces as well. And then once those ports were secured, the Germans would would launch uh, would disembark would embark its land forces across the Skagerrak and land on the ports secured in Oslo, in Kristiansand, in Stavanger, and in Alesund, and of course in Narvik. And this would be both to secure the actual iron ore imports in Narvik and also to eliminate any resistance within the Norwegian government. So this operation on German lines wasn't an operation merely to secure that one port, Narvik, that the British were interested in. It was to secure the entire country. It was to secure the entire government and to place it under German military authority. There was no other material incentive of resources within Norway, nor any ideological purpose in the same way that interested their conquest of Czechoslovakia and Poland in any conquest of Norway. It had not been in their radar, not within their plans, until fear of British intervention came in. And in order to invade Norway, the Germans would be required to invade Denmark as well, or at least to occupy it and eliminate resistance within that Danish government in order to secure the airfields in Aalborg and Skagen to launch paratroopers into southern Norway. And so that would be a three-step invasion process. One, secure the naval ports along the coastline from Oslo all the way up to Narvik. Two, secure Denmark. Three, secure mainland Norway and eliminate all opposition. And all things came to a head in April 7th, 1940, 2 months after a previous crisis with a German ship carrying British prisoners attempting to secure safety in Norwegian waters, and in the British Admiralty also neglecting and violating Norwegian rights in order to secure those soldiers. In April 7th, 1940, the German naval forces began Operation Weserübung and sent its naval forces, including the Admiral Hipper, the Deutschland, and a few other pocket battleships, heavy cruisers, and submarine forces, all into Norwegian waters to secure those vital ports: Oslo, Stavanger, Trondheim, Alesund, and Narvik. And at the same time, at around April 8th, around noon, the British embarked their own forces across the North Sea from Rosyth to intercept the German ships that they'd expected to be on the scene, and protect Norwegian waters. Both British and German fleets were violating Norwegian waters at this point. And the Norwegian government protested internationally about this, and their pleas were ignored by all parties. The British aircraft carrier, the HMS Ark Royal, arrived on scene with Admiral Somerville at its charge to attempt to wipe out any sort of German intervention on the way to Narvik. However, during that night of April 8th, they missed it. They lost the destroyer. The Royal Navy lost sight of the German battle cruisers, and the pocket battleships had arrived in their ports necessary and eliminated Norwegian resistance in the port of Narvik and eliminated Norwegian resistance in the ports of Trondheim in central Norway and Stavanger in the west. And the British attempted to attack these ships, including the submarine fleet found in Narvik. And this would be the second Battle of Narvik. The first Battle of Narvik being the German successful destruction of the entire Norwegian fleet stationed in it. So this would be an important battle, because if the Germans were to lose to the British would be able to secure the port, and there would be no ability for Germans to access and land forces, ground forces in Narvik, and secure Swedish iron ore transports. They'd have to march all the way up if they had secured southern Norway from Oslo, marched up to Narvik. And that is a very long way across a very mountainous territory, and it would not be as swift as their attempts in Poland. And this battle, the Second Battle of Narvik, ended in German victory. The British could not uh, prohibit the Germans from landing troops in the port of Narvik, and they retreated further south to other ports, and Germans secured their base there. Now, further south, the Germans were able to secure every single major key port. They secured Trondheim, they secured Stavanger, they secured Alesund, they secured Kristiansand, and what I'll talk about is its invasion and securing of the port in Oslo. So Norwegian forces, naval forces around Oslo was weak. However, they did have some decent armed and prepared land forces. Norway had 7 divisions, and counting numerically, the 1st Infantry Division was stationed in Halden in southeast of Oslo, along the Swedish border, and there those troops would be in strong position to defend any landing along the eastern side of the Oslo fjord along the Swedish border. So they were well stationed, and they were comparatively well fitted for defense. The 2nd Infantry Division was stationed in Oslo and around the Oslo fjord area in order to defend the royal palace and to defend the urban interests and military, the barracks and airfields in the greater Oslo area, including in Drammen, just several dozen miles, a few dozen miles to Oslo southwest. The 3rd Norwegian Infantry Division was located in the south in the city of Kristiansand, which was a small town located at very easy access for German forces to land. And there was an air base there that could be of use to German invaders, and so the 3rd Infantry Division's goal was simply to defend that. The 4th Norwegian Infantry Division was stationed in Stavanger city towards the western side, and its role was to defend the port and the air base in Stavanger. And then the 5th Infantry Division was stationed further up in the city of Bergen, which was the 2nd largest city in Norway, and this force would aim to defend the urban area of Bergen, as well as the smaller but existent airfield located in the city of Bergen. The British were very interested in protecting the port of Bergen, but they were eventually unable to do so. The 6th Infantry Division was further north, up in the city of Trondheim, and the 6th Norwegian Infantry Division was slightly less prepared, as it wasn't equipped with the right forces. It had fewer artillery than some of the other units. Actually, that was true for the 4th, 5th, and 6th Infantry Divisions. They were behind on artillery equipment. The Norwegian 6th Infantry Division defended the airbase in Trondheim, as well as the port of Trondheim, to any invaders' interest in it. They also had small detachments in the forms of battalions located further south than Trondheim, along cities like Lillehammer and Hamar, uh, along the interior of Norway. Finally, the 7th Infantry Division was mountain prepared, and this was probably the best equipped unit in the Norwegian army. The 7th Infantry Division was located far to the north near the cities of Narvik and Bodo and Mo i Rana, as well as defending areas of interest in Finnmark, um, close to the areas of war during the Winter War. And this division was mobilized and properly trained um, during the Soviet aggression in Finland in preparation for any possible need for intervention in the case of Soviet attack in Norwegian Finnmark. This was never the case, and the 7th Infantry Division, while well prepared, was never needed for any offensive or defensive operations during the Winter War. However, this meant that this force was well prepared for an attack on the town of Narvik. Now, the Germans managed in no more than 4 hours and 45 minutes to secure its interest in Denmark. It launched an attack with just 2 divisions from Flensburg and attacked along um, the mainland, across southern Jutland, and captured towns like Abenra, and hadn't gone close, only around halfway to Esbjerg, by the time the other marine forces of the German army was able to land in Copenhagen and secure the Star Fortress, which I visited 2 summers ago, and was able to force the Danish royalty to surrender the country to Germany to avoid further escalation and further casualties. The Danish armed forces, made up of only 1 division in Jutland and 1 division in Zealand, surrendered and decided to offer no more resistance afterwards. So at that point, the Germans had fully secured the country of Denmark, although the Danish interests in the Faroe Islands, Iceland, and Greenland were quickly occupied by were quickly defended by the other Danish troops there, and eventually the British would themselves land forces in the Faroe Islands, and eventually Greenland and Iceland on May 10th, 1940, same day that Churchill gained power and France was invaded in earnest. Now, with mainland Denmark secured, the Germans were able to launch paratrooper attacks from Aalborg base to land in southern Norway, including in Kristiansand, which had now been secured by landed forces there. And then the Germans now had to secure the land interests in the major key cities, most notably of which is Oslo, where its seat of government is, its greatest population center is located, and its greatest industrial area is located. And once Oslo was secured, the Germans hoped that the Norwegian government would surrender the same way that the Danish government had, that the whole country would lay down its arms and would no longer resist. And unfortunately for the Germans, that would not be the case yet, because the Norwegians maintained its defense in Oslo, as it did in its attempt at defense across Stavanger, Kristiansand, Bergen, Trondheim, and Narvik. So I'm going to leave that for a part two where I'm going to film that. I'm going to talk about that in a different setting. But right now, I had an enjoyable time talking about this story so far. I knew I couldn't finish this in one bit, but I talked about just about the necessary background information to the German invasion of Denmark and Norway, and the first day of the operation as well. Skimmed over a lot of the naval details because I thought that'd be a little less interesting, and I'm personally less knowledgeable on the naval aspect of most of the conflict in Western Europe. So I might talk about that at a later date, maybe in a couple years. But for now, I talked about the preceding events and the day of the first day of the German invasion of Denmark and Norway, uh, April 9th, 1940, the first day of Operation Vesrubung. So next time we'll talk about more. I might make this three parts. This being the first, second being the first few days of the invasion, securing the interests on uh, the Norwegian mainland, the majority part of it, and third episode just talking about what happened after the main action, after Trondheim was secured, the march up north from Trondheim through Mo i Rana, through all of the uh, mountains up towards Narvik, as well as the final battles and Allied evacuations from Narvik, uh, eventually ending on June 10th, 1940, the same day as the Italian entry into the French campaign. So I want to talk about that as a third episode, and it's possible that I split that third episode into two as well. But as of now, this is what I talked about today. Um, I'll upload another YouTube video to Pacificus Mapping about the second part of the invasion of Norway. And in the meantime, I might make a video about a completely different part of World War II or a diplomatic event. I'm considering making a video about the diplomatic repercussions of the Anschluss, including impact on German-Italian relations and German-Japanese relations. And it could be interesting to talk about reactions from Yugoslavia, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia as well. So I might make a video on um, the international relations aspect of the German annexation of Austria in 1938, excluding the Western Allies, Britain, France, and by extension, Belgium and the United States. So I might talk about that at a later date, but today I had a good time. I haven't done this um, in a few weeks, so very happy about it. I'm going to upload new videos later.